In a dark and damp alley in Hell's Kitchen, Big Apple City. A tall and strong Chinese youth, with a black crow squatting on his shoulder. The Chinese youth is talking to a Slavic woman with long platinum hair, a devilish figure, but simple clothes. Miss, I have to make it clear to you, I saved you. It was just a coincidence. You just need to say thank you to me. The matter between us is over. The Chinese youth said with a straight face and serious. He completely ignored the fact that there was a big beauty in front of him, as if this Russian beauty had no attraction to him at all. But I don't know where to go. I know nothing about my past. The only impression I have is that you saved me from the sea. Anna grabbed her collar with both hands and said in panic. Her pitiful expression made people want to protect her. But the Chinese youth was completely unmoved. He just twitched his mouth and his eyes involuntarily drifted to the trash can in the alley and to the unconscious gangsters with twisted limbs. He sighed. The other party showed up so brazenly, and acted without any heart, as if he had taken him for granted. The Chinese young man said helplessly, "Ms. Natasha Romanoff, let's be frank. What do you or you guys want to do?" The young man knew the identity of the beauty in front of him. She was a super agent trained by the Red House of the former Soviet Union and now a SHIELD agent. She was estimated to be over 80 years old. Natasha, whose identity was exposed, was not panicked. She adjusted her expression slightly, stroked her specially dyed platinum hair with her right hand, raised her chin slightly, and turned into the charming SHIELD super agent. "Alvin Yi, sir, can we talk first? How do you know me? Now you are the person we are interested in." Alvin was actually wondering how he could be targeted by SHIELD. Since he traveled through time 3 years ago, he has tried to be very low-key. In his previous life, Alvin Yi was called Yi Qing, an ordinary middle-aged man in China, with a wife and son, and a relatively mature man. His travel through time was funny. When he was moving, he found a laptop computer he used in high school under the bed. He tried it on a whim, and it actually worked. When he had some free time, he used this computer to play the once super classic game Diablo 2. As a man who must have plugins to play games, I naturally downloaded a so-called character and item modifier. I excitedly created a Druid character for myself, with all 4 attributes of 20 and full summoning skills. I was ready to bring summoned creatures, brush the map, and reminisce about the past. Of course, I filled the modified and enhanced backpack and box with rooms, ready to make room equipment myself. Oh, and the Hredrick cube that is essential for the game. As a result, I don't know whether the computer is too old or the editor is too powerful. When I just opened the game to run this character, the laptop exploded. Yi Qing took the legacy he created and traveled to this Marvel world, the body of young Alvin Yi. When I learned that I traveled to the Marvel world, I decided to keep a low profile here. If I really can't find a way back, then I will live my life here peacefully. Although he had obtained the 10 summoning abilities of a druid from the game Diablo 2, he had never shown them to anyone. He was very confused as to why SHIELD came to him. He was just a restaurant owner in Hell's Kitchen. However, from Natasha's tone, it seemed that their initial target was not him, which made Alvin feel a little relieved. It was better not to deal with a huge and violent organization like SHIELD. After thinking for a while, Alvin said, "The day I rescued you from the sea, someone was calling your name in your headphones. So I just sent you to the hospital. Listen, Ms. Romanoff, I don't want to cause trouble, and things related to agents are usually troublesome." After that, Alvin waved his hand, wanting to end this not-so-pleasant conversation. Natasha listened and tapped her ear with her left hand, as if she was listening to someone. About 20 seconds later, Natasha nodded to Alvin and said with a smile, "I think I have to thank you for pulling me out of the sea." "So, Thank you. You're welcome. Then, can I leave? I still have to take care of my restaurant. Alvin did not try to deceive the other party by acting smart. The other party was an expert in this field. He just clearly expressed his refusal to continue to contact the other party. Natasha looked at Alvin, bit her lip habitually, and said with a smile, "You are not the target of my mission this time, but the location of your restaurant is very convenient for me to approach the target. That's why we met this time. I don't think you will mind having an extra beautiful waitress in the restaurant, right?" After that, Natasha put her hand on Alvin's shoulder and moved close to Alvin. But before she could make any follow-up move, Alvin shuddered all over, took a step back, and raised one hand to stop Natasha from approaching. Knowing that the other party was an old man over 80 years old, he still had physical ambiguity with the other party. This was something that Alvin, a Virgo, could never accept. Alvin said coldly, "Ms. Romanov, please be respectful. I don't care what you or you guys want to do. Please stay away from my restaurant, even if it's because I helped you. I really don't want to get into trouble." Natasha's face gradually turned cold. Few people could refuse her request, which hurt the self-esteem of this ace agent. After adjusting her collar, Natasha revealed the cold side of an agent and said in a cold voice, "Alvin Yi is a Chinese orphan. When he was 8 years old, his parents died in a street gunfight. He was then adopted by an orphanage. At the age of 18, he returned to Hell's Kitchen and inherited the restaurant property left by his parents." Natasha sneered at Alvin and continued, "In the next month, the participants in the street gunfight died one after another. Mr. Yi, how do you think they died?" Alvin shrugged and said indifferently, "Who knows? If Miss Romanov knows, please tell me and I will write him a thank you letter. Or if you want to call the police, I can lend you my phone to call 911. Natasha looked at Alvin sarcastically and said, "The police may not care about the life and death of this scum, but the local gangs must be interested in knowing why 2 famous gangs disappeared inexplicably back then." Natasha's threat made Alvin angry. She never took Alvin's safety to heart. In her heart, completing the mission was her first priority. As long as the mission could be completed smoothly, the safety of others was not in her consideration. Feeling Alvin's inner anger, the crow that had been perched on his shoulder croaked twice, flapped its wings and flew up to circle over the alley. Alvin looked Natasha straight in the eyes and said in a voice so cold it would freeze, "Is this how you treat your savior? As an agent, who gave you the right to threaten a law-abiding citizen? I will never accept your threats. I just hope you and your people get out of my territory." The famous Black Widow obviously wouldn't take a restaurant owner's threat seriously. Although Alvin is tall, who cares? Natasha said with a serious expression, "On behalf of SHIELD, I now ask you to cooperate with my work. Otherwise, I will arrest you for illegal possession of weapons, and then take over your restaurant and do my job." She spoke as if it was a matter of course, leaving Alvin no room for refusal. Alvin really didn't expect that the SHIELD agents would behave like this. They were so overbearing to an ordinary person. Although Alvin was not an ordinary person, it was true that he illegally possessed weapons. But this was Hell's Kitchen, and most people living here would have their own self-defense weapons to fight against dangers that might appear at any time. Using this crime to arrest a resident of Hell's Kitchen was something that the police in the Big Apple would not do. Alvin was stunned for a moment, a little disappointed with Natasha's attitude. It seems that the Avengers' personalities are not as good as shown in the movies. Alvin, who didn't want to get entangled anymore, looked at Natasha with cold eyes and said in a cold voice, "I don't know what department SHIELD is, and I don't care. If you want to accuse me of any crime, please call the police or the FBI. Oh, remember to ask them to bring a search warrant." After saying that, Alvin turned around and opened the back door of his restaurant in the alley, and walked in. When closing the door, he thought for a moment and said, "This is Hell's Kitchen. My restaurant welcomes guests to dine in, but if anyone enters the second floor where I live, I will exercise a citizen's right of self-defense." With a bang, the iron door was shut heavily. Natasha's face was livid. How long had it been since he was defeated in front of an ordinary person? He couldn't even remember it. Alvin first ignored her beauty and then ignored her threat, which made her feel provoked. Especially in the headset, a female voice mocked her. The famous Black Widow also has a chance to fail. Natasha whispered a curse word, turned around and walked out of the alley. When she passed by the knocked-out hooligans, she kicked a black hooligan who had just woken up on the head. The unlucky guy hit his head heavily on the trash can next to him, making a loud bang sound, and fainted again. After kicking the hooligans unconscious, Natasha seemed to feel better. As an elite agent, the situation just now could only be regarded as a trivial setback, simply because she misjudged Alvin's character. In traditional concepts, Chinese people should not be willing to confront government departments. Although Alvin lives in Hell's Kitchen, the most chaotic place in the Big Apple, he has opened a small restaurant safely. This shows that he has some ability, but Alvin can ignore Natasha's threats and fight back with a plausible argument, which is completely beyond her expectation. But the mission must be completed. Natasha slowly walked out of the alley and turned right to Alvin's restaurant. Alvin's restaurant was renovated from a two-story building facing the street. The first floor was the restaurant, the second floor was where Yi Qing lived, and the basement was a warehouse. This was the only legacy Alvin's parents left him in this world. Above the wooden door of the restaurant hung a Chinese sign Peace Hotel, and on both sides of the door hung a red lantern with Chinese characteristics. Under each of the harem pants was a black giant dog that stood more than 120 centimeters tall. In fact, any experienced person can see that these are two giant wolves with amazing physiques, but none of the nearby residents passing by the restaurant entrance are afraid of them. Some naughty children even hug the necks of the two giant wolves and play with them intimately. Whenever the two giant wolves encounter naughty children, they will interact with the children in a very humane way, then pat the children's buttocks with their front paws and drive them back to their parents. Natasha was very surprised. It was 10 o'clock in the evening, and this was Hell's Kitchen. Even the police patrol cars dared not come in after 12 o'clock at night. But this street behaved like an ordinary residential community, and nearby residents would stroll and walk on this street from time to time. This was absolutely impossible to see in the other 24 blocks of Hell's Kitchen. In a normal Hell's Kitchen, there would be few pedestrians on the street after 8 o'clock. Standing under the dim street lights were either drug dealers or pimps. This was a place where even prostitutes were unwilling to go out on the street to solicit customers. The street in front of Natasha was completely different from the Hell's Kitchen she had imagined. She knew that there must be something wrong with the intelligence given to her. But she was a problem solver. Last month, she had an accident during a mission. This mission was an observation and assessment mission with a vacation nature, and the target of this mission lived in this neighborhood. Unexpectedly, there were unexpected situations one after another before the mission even started. This made her feel very interesting, and Natasha, who had always been uninterested in the mission and wanted to just deal with it, became interested, not in the target person, but in the restaurant owner Alvin. Anyone with a discerning eye can see that the tranquility of this street must be related to this restaurant called Peace Hotel. Almost everyone who passes by the restaurant will slow down their pace, and even if they don't go in, they will greet the two giant wolves at the door. Hi, DOM. Other guys dressed like gangsters will pass by quickly on the sidewalk across the road to avoid the sight of the two giant wolves. Natasha walked to the restaurant door excitedly and greeted the two giant wolves like passers-by. Hi, for. Hi, Dom. The two giant wolves sniffed the air and obviously didn't like the smell of Natasha. They stood up and roared at her in a low voice, which was obviously full of hostility towards her. Natasha was stared at by two giant wolves. Although she was not scared, she was very nervous. She did not bring any firearms with her on the mission today. The gadgets she had for self-defense obviously would not work against the two giant wolves. She didn't know why the giant wolves, which were very friendly to others, were very unfriendly to her. If the two giant wolves attacked her, she was not sure she could leave here unscathed. Miss, I advise you to step back. Thor and Dom are not easy to mess with. A young voice sounded from behind Natasha. Natasha turned around and found that it was two young men who came together. One was a fat curly-haired young man who was smiling all the time, and the other was a blind young man holding a guide stick. The one who was talking was the fat curly-haired young man. While talking to Natasha, he approached the two giant wolves enthusiastically and greeted them. Hi, Thor. Hi, Dom. He stretched out his hand to touch the heads of the two giant wolves, but was pushed away by the giant wolves with their front paws. After staring at Natasha coldly, the two giant wolves patted the fat man's thigh with their front paws as a greeting, turned back to both sides of the gate, and lay down again. The enthusiastic fat man turned around, looked at Natasha, grinned sincerely and said, "It's rare to see strangers appearing in Hell's Kitchen so late, especially a beautiful girl like Miss Young. I think you may be in trouble. My name is Fudge Nelson, a lawyer from the Nelson Murdoch law firm, and I look forward to serving you." After that, Fudge took out a business card and handed it to Natasha. Natasha put on a shy smile, looked at Foggy Nelson in front of her, and took his business card. She said gratefully, "Thank you. I didn't know these two big dogs were so fierce. Why did they want to attack me?" Foggy was about to speak when the blind young man next to him poked his lower back with his guide stick and urged, "We have to hurry up. Alvin only makes 50 sizzling steaks a day. If we are too late, we won't be able to eat them." Fosh, who was reminded, nodded and said, Yes, we have to hurry, sorry miss, we have to catch up with our late dinner." Then he quickly opened the door and called the blind youth, "Hurry up, Matt, I don't want to miss Alvin's sizzling steak." Natasha, who was ignored by the two young men again, felt very strange. Many things today were a little different from what she thought. But this made her even more curious about what kind of place this was. There were two giant wolves blocking the way at the door, so it was obviously not a good idea to force your way in. But as an agent, there were always many ways. Natasha took out her cell phone and made a call, saying in a panic, "Hello, is this 911? I'm in Hell's Kitchen, 34th block. There are two giant wolves here. They seem to be attacking me. Please come and save me quickly." About 15 minutes later, a police car drove over and two policemen got out of the car. A middle-aged policeman walked towards Natasha first and asked, "Miss, did you call the police? Where are the giant wolves you mentioned?" Natasha was surprised that the middle-aged policeman ignored the giant wolves in front of her and ran over to ask her, "Didn't you see the young policeman run over to greet the two giant wolves?" Natasha frowned and said in confusion, "Aren't those giant wolves? They almost attacked me when I wanted to enter this restaurant just now." She pointed at the two giant wolves that were impatiently driving away the young policeman. The middle-aged policeman smiled and said, "Those are not giant wolves. These two are the pet dogs of the owner of the Peace Hotel. They are registered in our police station. They have never attacked people at will. As for why they want to attack you, well, maybe there is some smell on you." He looked at Natasha thoughtfully. The old policeman smelled something unusual from her. Natasha said oh and said, if I want to go in, the two officers will not watch me being attacked by these two, or pets, right? She looked at the middle-aged policeman with a meaningful look. The middle-aged policeman, who had some guesses about Natasha's identity, smiled bitterly and said, of course you can go in. I promise that Thor and Dawn will not attack you. But I have to remind you that the boss here, Alvin, is a good man. Natasha smiled non-committally, ignoring the warning in the middle-aged policeman's words, and raised her chin slightly, indicating that she wanted to go in. There were only 6 tables and 2 booths against the wall in the restaurant. It was already full at this moment. Fudge and Matt found 2 seats at the bar and sat down. Matt, why did you leave so quickly just now? It's rare to meet a beautiful woman here. Oh, I forgot you can't see it. As soon as the fat Fudge finished speaking, he found a thin and pretty girl at the bar, holding 2 glasses of lemonade in her hands, and was about to put them in front of the 2 of them. But after hearing Fudge's words, one of the glasses was handed to a boy in a wheelchair reading a book at the bar. The boy grinned with his 2 missing front teeth and said, thank you, Sister Jessica. The other glass was placed in front of Matt, and the girl knocked on the glass intimately, making a ding sound. He reminded Matt, your lemonade and sizzling steak will be served a little later today. Please wait a moment. After that, he glared at Fudge again, turned and left the bar to settle the bill for a table of guests who were leaving. Fudge shouted in protest, hey, Jesse, you can't do this. Why don't you give me a drink? He turned to look at the little boy at the bar. Hey, man, that glass of lemonade in your hand should be mine. If you give it to me, Mr. Fudge Nelson will write you a letter of praise. The little boy made a face at Fudge, picked up the lemonade and imitated the way people on TV drank red wine, shaking it, smelling it, and then taking a small sip comfortably. The good-tempered Fudge made a funny, threatening gesture to intimidate the little boy. The big and the small started playing across the bar. Matt smiled and shook his head, feeling helpless and amused at Fudge's heartlessness. At the deepest part of the bar, against the wall, there was a stove with 10 small burners. Alvin, wearing an apron, turned his back to the bar, watching over 10 sizzling steaks being made at the same time. Without turning his head, he said, Fudge, if you disturb our Mr. Nick Custer from studying, you can say goodbye to dinner tonight. Our Mr. Custer only got a D in math yesterday. Hey, Alvin, we agreed not to tell anyone. Nick waved his arms and shouted in protest. Alvin didn't look back, and said jokingly, yes, we agreed that you should finish your homework quietly in your room today, but you ran to the restaurant again. Nick said a little guilty, you went out just now, and Sister Jess was alone. I wanted to help. He remembered something, raised the book in his hand, shook it, and said, and I was reading a book just now. After saying that, he pretended to be working hard. Yes, Mr. Custer, who loves reading, can the Batman in the book teach you how to get an A on the test? After saying that, he used a special iron clamp to pick up a piece of sizzling steak and put it on a pine tray. He picked up the tray with one hand and put a steak on a rack on Nick's wheelchair. Boy, go take it to old Stan and talk to him about Batman and see if you can get a tip. Alvin, you can't do this. Nick is still a child. He just doesn't have much talent for learning. You can't force him. It will only make things worse. Fudge protested to Alvin, but earned a big eye roll from Nick. Fudge, are you talking to a Chinese about how to educate children? Are you sure? A fat white man, who was also sitting at the bar waiting for his meal, put one hand on his chin, letting the fat on his chin overflow to both sides, making his cheeks look particularly bloated. The fat white man looked at Alvin's busy back in awe, and continued to flatter him. You know, Chinese children are very good at school. My previous teacher at school also said that Chinese people all know a kind of witchcraft that can make children become very smart. Fudge didn't seem to like this fat white man, and said in a sarcastic tone, "Sheriff, why can I only see you on this day of every month? What are you waiting for? What's the benefit here that makes the famous owner of Sheriff's garage sit here obediently on this day of every month? Is it for that steak? Hey, Fudge, you have to respect me a little." Sheriff shouted angrily, but nothing more excessive came out of his mouth. Here, everyone who is familiar with him knows that the boss Alvin hates people swearing, especially when there are children. Sheriff's words were heard by an old black man nearby, who cursed angrily. "You greedy Momo, you shoddy Momo, even God can't save your triple X, and you still want people to respect you. Alvin must be crazy to trust you, a triple X triple X." The old black man spoke very fast, and he seemed to be used to the rules here. Whenever he had to use swear words, he would replace them with some black slang that no one could understand. But he could curse so smoothly, you have to admire the black man's rap talent. After hearing this, Fudge excitedly ran over and high-fived the old black man, and said with a smile, "Old Kent, well done." Sheriff was angry, glaring at the two men and waving his fists, but he never dared to take action. Alvin did not allow anyone to take action here. There had been some unbelieving guys who had tried to make trouble here before, but their endings were not very good. At this time, the wooden door of the restaurant was pushed open, and a beautifully dressed young Eastern European woman walked in. She glanced at the restaurant, walked directly to the bar, tilted her head towards Sheriff with her chin up, and motioned him to move aside. Sheriff, who was angry, smiled awkwardly and said, "Hi, Dahlia." It was considered a greeting. He took his water cup, found a seat that a guest had just left, and sat down. The beautiful young woman sat elegantly on the round stool at the bar, nodding and greeting the people around her. She took out a cigarette and lit it, holding her chin with one hand and holding the cigarette with the other, watching Alvin, who was busy at the back of the bar. Jessica placed a glass of lemonade heavily in front of the beautiful young woman and said stiffly, "Ms. Dahlia, smoking is not allowed here." The young woman, Dahlia, looked at Jessica and said with a smile, "Oh, lucky girl. Can you let me finish this cigarette? I think there are several gentlemen around here who won't mind." After that, her sparkling eyes swept to the left and right of the bar. Several men nearby, except Matt, nodded involuntarily. Jessica glared at the men, who were not doing their job well, ignored their protests, and gave the first steak to the blind Matt, and handed the knife and fork to Matt. 10 stoves were turned on at the same time, and the steaks were soon cooked and served to the guests. Alvin wiped his hands with a towel, walked to the bar and poured himself a beer. "Alvin, you have to take care of Thor and Dawn. I just saw them blocking a beautiful woman outside the restaurant. No wonder there are always some stinky men here," Dahlia said with a smile on her face when she saw Alvin finish his work. She completely ignored the looks from the stinky man. Alvin ignored Dahlia's words and shouted at Nick, who was arguing with old Stan about who was better, Batman or Captain America. "Nick Custer, it's 8:30 now. I will check your homework at 10 o'clock. If you haven't finished it yet, you still have an hour and a half. Boy, you don't want to know how I punish a lazy child." Nick held his head in his hands in frustration, cried out in pain, and quickly pushed his wheelchair into the bar. He came to a small door next to the stove, opened the door, stood up on one leg, and hopped up to the second floor. The diners in the restaurant laughed, and Fudge even joked, "Nick, you have to be faster. I don't want to see you sweeping the street in a wheelchair. Ha ha." Nick heard this, grabbed the handrail, turned around and made a face at Fudge, and quickly jumped to the second floor. When the small door closed automatically, Dahlia extinguished the cigarette in her hand, took out 10 bundles of $20 bills from her small handbag and pushed them to Alvin. The look in her eyes when she looked at Alvin was filled with pleading, desire, and a little bit of insecurity. Alvin looked at the 20,000 in front of him, shook his head, took half of it, pushed the other half back to Doria, and said, "I know you have a few new girls who have smuggled from Eastern Europe. Send the underage ones to school, and they just need to pay me $100 a month. Let the girls who want to work in a decent industry save some money and live here." Doria shook her head and said, "This is against the rules. If you only charge me $100, other gangs will find out and we will all be in trouble. Now the girls and I are living a good life, and they all have very good incomes. Last week 2 girls saved enough money and moved to Los Angeles." Then she pushed the money to Alvin again. "Please accept it, Alvin. You're a good man. I know you don't want money from us women, but I beg you to accept it. I really can't accept being controlled by other gangs anymore." Doria's face showed a pleading expression, which made people feel very pity for her. "Take it, Alvin. We all know you're a good man and you'll protect their safety. But if you don't take her money, it will break the rules of Hell's Kitchen and the gangs nearby will go crazy. We know you're not afraid of them, but this will put them in danger." Old Kent on the side chimed in. Alvin was a straightforward person, and what Old Kent said made sense. After a slight hesitation, he called the fat white man Sharif and said, "Come and take it. 15 days, 2 food trucks. If you're cutting corners, I'll let Saul go and talk to you." Sharif, with his shoulders slumped, protested in a low voice, $20,000 is only enough for 1 food truck. "Alvin, you are a fair guy. You can't let me suffer." Alvin poured another glass of beer and handed it to Sharif. "This is a punishment for your greed. There won't be a next time, okay?" Alvin's gentle expression scared Sharif, and he quickly said, Okay, I get it. There will be no problem again, I promise." "Old Kent, who's the most needy person in the neighborhood? Go ask them if they want to run a food truck." Alvin ignored Sharif's assurance. He believed that Sharif would not dare to play tricks. Instead, he turned to ask Old Kent. Old Kent thought for a moment and said, "Lilith is raising 3 children alone. It's very hard. She will need a truck. Archie's family of 6, who are all unemployed, will also need one. Then notify them to go to Sharif's garage and have a look. If there are any special requirements, just ask Sharif to change them." After saying that, he waved his hand and drove away Sharif, who was holding the money bag tightly. He said to a black man who was sitting at the dining table by the door and wolfing down his food, "JJ, when you leave, please see Sharif off. He is not safe alone." JJ is a retired Marine Corps soldier who got into some trouble and fled to Hell's Kitchen and became a security guard and driver at Alvin's restaurant. "Okay, boss." JJ raised his head and swallowed the last bit of steak, finished a large glass of lemonade in one breath, stood up and said something to Alvin, and asked Sharif to leave the restaurant. As soon as he opened the door of the restaurant, he saw a girl who was more beautiful than Dahlia, followed by 2 policemen, walking into the restaurant. Seeing that the 2 policemen were acquaintances, JJ didn't think much about it and took Sharif to the car and left. The beautiful Natasha walked into the restaurant. Her beautiful face and sexy figure raised the temperature of the restaurant by several degrees. Dahlia mouthed to Alvin silently, "Is she here for you?" After asking, she looked at the eyes of the man nearby and whispered, "She's a big trouble." Alvin nodded silently, confirming what Dahlia said. Jessica, who was drinking lemonade, pouted angrily and muttered some indistinct swear words starting with B. Matt, who was eating steak, suddenly raised his head, looked at Jessica and smiled slightly. Like a child who was caught doing something bad, Jessica smiled awkwardly at Matt. Then she realized that Matt couldn't see her. Just when she was a little overwhelmed, she found that Matt smiled warmly at her and nodded with an encouraging expression. It seemed to say, "Good scolding, keep going." Jessica, who was teased by Matt, was not angry. She jokingly poured him a glass of lemonade and mischievously swapped the positions of the pepper and salt in front of Matt. At the same time, she glared at Foch, who was laughing with his hands covering his mouth, and signaled him not to speak. Natasha and two policemen walked to the bar. The two policemen greeted the acquaintances around them and sat down in an empty seat. Natasha looked at the full bar seats, walked to a middle-aged white man who was looking at her, and whispered a few words. The middle-aged white man was a little excited, trying to show his gentlemanly demeanor. He took his steak and found someone he knew to share a seat. The spineless performance attracted a round of boos. Jessica placed a glass of lemonade in front of Natasha and said in a cold voice, "Miss, we have sold out of steak today, or you can have a sandwich." Natasha glanced at Jessica and said with a smile, "Maybe you misunderstood. I'm not here to eat. I'm here to apply for the job of waiter." Then she looked at Alvin and said, "Mr. Yi, do you need a smiling waiter here?" After that, she smiled provocatively at Jessica. Jessica stamped her feet angrily, turned around and got a rag, and wiped the bar counter, which was not dirty to begin with. "I don't need an agent to serve here," Alvin said, turning to Foch and asking, "Foch, you are a lawyer. Have you heard of a government department called SHIELD? Miss Natasha, who claims to be an agent of SHIELD, wants to frame me and kick me out of the restaurant. Can you give me some professional advice?" As soon as Alvin said this, the atmosphere of the entire restaurant changed completely. All the men looked at Natasha with cold eyes. It seemed that they wanted to tear her into pieces at any time. Matt and Foch were stunned when they heard Alvin's words. This time it was Matt, who had been very silent, who spoke. SHIELD is affiliated with the World Security Council. Their main responsibility is to deal with criminals or criminal organizations with antisocial behaviors that threaten human safety. If you, Alvin, don't have the habit of eating people, I don't think you have to care about her threat. If she has affected your life, I think Nelson Murdoch Law Firm will be happy to sue SHIELD for you. Of course, we must first confirm the identity of this lady. Impersonating an agent is a felony, but this is the responsibility of the two police officers." Matt's words made Natasha look unhappy. She said in a cold voice, "I just want Boss Alvin to cooperate with our work. This is the right of our SHIELD. If you are unwilling to cooperate, we can force you to rent your restaurant as a workplace. This is authorized by the Supreme Court of the United States." Matt smiled and said confidently, "Then you must first prove the necessity of your behavior, that is, where are the criminals endangering human safety nearby?" "Excuse me, Miss Agent, your actions have been exposed so thoroughly. There is really no need to stay here and embarrass Alvin. And I can be sure that there are absolutely no criminals within your work scope within the 2 blocks around here." Natasha said to Matt with a livid face, "This is my job, and you messed up my job. If there is any unexpected situation here, will you be responsible? Or will those cowardly policemen be responsible? We should be responsible. We are the police here. Miss Natasha, please show us your ID. We now suspect that you are impersonating a SHIELD agent." The middle-aged policeman stood up and looked at Natasha expressionlessly, holding the holster with his right hand. The young policeman was stunned for a moment, then reacted and stood up as well, holding the holster with his hand and staring at Natasha. Natasha, who was stared at by 2 policemen, laughed in anger. She was able to calm down. She ignored the 2 policemen's fierce looks and turned to look at Alvin. She said, "Alvin, your behavior has completely messed up my operation. I can tell you that my target is a Croatian named Zbudija Dirave, nicknamed Purple Man, who lives in the house opposite your restaurant. He is suspected of having the ability to control people's minds. We have intelligence confirming that he is involved in several suicides in Washington, Miami, and other places. I was ordered to come here to observe him undercover. And you messed up my operation, and our field staff will go to arrest him soon. Then catch him. Since you know how dangerous he is, why don't you just catch him directly, but observe him? When Alvin heard that the target was the Purple Man, he breathed a sigh of relief. This guy had already been fed to the corpse vines by him. He also rescued Jessica, who was controlled by him. SHIELD will observe these people with special abilities, assess their destructive power, and then take action. This is why I came here, and you messed up my mission, Natasha said to Alvin in a cold voice. Alvin curled his lips and sneered. Observe, evaluate. Why do I feel like a headhunting company recruiting employees? He turned to look at the young policeman and asked, Scott, if the police knew there was such a guy, what would they do? The young scout thought for a moment and said seriously, make a plan to quickly capture or kill the criminal. Look, our police officers here all know what to do, but you're just thinking about observation and evaluation. Let me guess, if necessary, you still want to recruit this guy to serve you. Alvin said sarcastically. This is the right of SHIELD. We have the right to recruit criminals for reform so that they can play a greater role. Before Natasha finished her words, Jessica slapped the bar. A deep palm print was left on the fringe-thick wooden tabletop. Jessica pointed at the door, gnashing her teeth, and shouted in a cold voice, Get out, you are not welcome here. Matt and Foch shook their heads at the same time, obviously disagreeing with Shield's behavior. Instead of catching a criminal, they wanted to observe and evaluate him before recruiting him to serve them, completely ignoring the safety of ordinary people, regardless of the people he had killed and the crimes he should bear. This is not the behavior of a responsible organization. Jessica's strength shocked everyone. Foch tilted his neck back in fear. Thinking of how he always liked to tease Jessica, this seemingly harmless little girl, his neck began to ache. If she did this to him, he would be put into a coffin and buried in the ground. The middle-aged policeman, Michael, smiled bitterly and rubbed his ribs, as if he was recalling something bad. Natasha was even more surprised. She didn't expect a little girl to have such great strength. Not everyone can make a palm print on such a solid table. At least she had never seen anyone in S.H.I.E.L.D. who could do this with just her body. She was a little stunned for a moment without any weapons, not knowing how to respond. The door of the restaurant was pushed open again, and a middle-aged man in a suit and tie, with a slightly bald head, a gentle temperament and a smile on his face walked in. A sincere smile gives people a great favor. The middle-aged man smiled and walked to the bar, nodded to Alvin, and said apologetically, I'm sorry to cause you trouble. My name is Phil Coulson, an agent of SHIELD. Then he turned to Natasha, Agent Normanoff. I'm sorry that there is a problem with our intelligence. It is an intelligence that has expired for nearly a year, and the Purple Man is no longer here. But you still have to submit a report to the headquarters when you go back to explain your inappropriate behavior today. Natasha nodded with a cold face and turned to walk towards the restaurant entrance. She didn't want to stay here for a minute. Alvin looked at the good guy in front of him, the glue of the Avengers, Agent Phil Coulson, with a joking look. Why, do you think you can end it so easily by showing off here? I have to remind you that this is Hell's Kitchen, the Peace Hotel. No one can do something wrong here without paying the price and leave casually. As soon as Alvin finished speaking, Natasha, who was walking to the restaurant door, was bumped in with a scream. She crossed her legs in an indecent manner and fell to the ground. The black giant wolf 4 grinned and growled at her. Coulson reacted quickly and turned around and pointed his gun at the giant wolf 4. Another giant wolf, Dom, flashed in from the door, circled along the wall, and came to the side of Coulson, baring his teeth at him and growling. Mr. E, you have to think carefully. Are you going to attack a SHIELD agent? Have you thought about the consequences? The smile on Coulson's face disappeared, but he did not show fear. He just swung the muzzle of the gun and pointed it at the 2 giant wolves. He calmly questioned Alvin. Alvin smiled and did not respond. I have surveillance and recordings here, which clearly record how Agent Natasha abused her power to threaten a legal citizen. And you, Agent Coulson, come in and apologize and want to end this matter. I'm afraid you think too simply. Then he turned to Matt and asked, Matt, what will happen if I sue them for this matter? Matt took a sip of lemonade slowly and said, You can sue them for abuse of power and threatening and intimidating the public. Oh, now add one more thing, threatening citizens' pets with guns. The result will be that these 2 agents will lose their jobs, and SHIELD needs to make an explanation to the public for this matter. Why can't they disregard the safety of ordinary people when performing their missions? They can abuse their power when the public refuses. Well, maybe we can get some financial compensation. Matt's words made Jessica applaud. She was now full of hostility towards perverted organizations that wanted to recruit Purple Men. Matt's words made Coulson sweat. This experienced agent was not afraid of dangerous criminals, but he was helpless in the face of a lawyer like Matt, especially when he had no advantage in both reason and power. Coulson remained calm despite the disadvantage. He did not argue with Matt, but just said softly, So, Mr. E, what do you want? You can forgive my colleague's impulsiveness. She has also shed blood and been injured for this country. I think you should know that, Mr. E. Alvin waved to Thor and Dom to go back to the door, poured another beer, called Coulson and said, You're right, I pulled her out of the water at the beach last week and called an ambulance for her. Thinking that the atmosphere had eased, Coulson put away his pistol, sat down at the bar, picked up his beer and took a sip. The total amount for the ambulance and the medical expenses is $2,000. Matt, write it down. I want them to compensate me together. After Alvin finished speaking, Coulson almost spit out a mouthful of beer. He didn't expect that he would cause himself an extra $2,000 of trouble just by saying something. Oh, by the way, Foch, you told me that you know someone in the media. Give them a call and ask them to come over. They should be interested in how SHIELD works. And this matter is considered a commission. Your law firm can take 20% of the compensation as a commission fee. Alvin smiled and nodded at Foch, who was eager to try. 20 is too little. How about 50? It's still a bit risky for us to go against SHIELD. Foch bargained with a grin. 40 is not more. Your efforts will determine the quality of the kindergarten facilities on the corner and the quality of the teachers hired. Alvin made the decision. Foch excitedly saluted like Patton and said, I understand. I will inform the media right away. Alvin, you are great. I have decided to donate half of the income from this commission to the kindergarten. After that, he took out his phone and dialed. Coulson was really panicking. They had encountered such a situation before. It was fine for a civilian to not cooperate with the agents during their mission, but you wanted to sue SHIELD. Was there any law in this? He hurriedly stopped Foch from making the call. The smart Coulson even glanced at the phone number. It was indeed the news reporting phone number of Fox TV station. Mr. E, we can have a good talk. Please don't escalate this matter. This is just the agent's personal behavior and does not represent SHIELD's style of doing things. We should sit down and have a good talk. Maybe you can offer a reasonable price and we can settle the matter. Coulson looked at Alvin and said pleadingly. Natasha, who had fallen down, also got up and stood behind Coulson. She acted very strangely. She was not too angry, but looked at Alvin with some appreciation. In her impression, no one could face the pressure of S.H.I.E.L.D. as well as he did. Maybe she made a huge mistake in judging Alvin. This made her very interested. She was waiting for Coulson to finish this matter. She would come here often in the future. As an ace agent, she should get up where she fell. Alvin was a little scared by Natasha's eyes. He was not afraid, but felt that being targeted by such an old monster might cost him a lot of trouble in the future. Alvin pinched his chin, grinned at Coulson, and said, "I think 1 million is a reasonable number." Coulson covered his heart heavily, as if he had been hit hard. He said with difficulty, "Are you kidding, Mr. Yi? S.H.I.E.L.D. will never pay 1 million for this. It is absolutely impossible. In fact, I am ready to pay out of my own pocket. But Mr. Yi, 1 million is too scary. This is my salary for 10 years. Alvin ignored Coulson's show of sympathy and said coldly, "You mean that the reputation of S.H.I.E.L.D. is not worth $1 million US? Really? Maybe you should make a phone call and ask. I am not interested in your salary. Or we should resolve this matter through legal channels." Fudge on the side jumped excitedly and shouted, "Alvin, sue them, sue them." No wonder he was so excited. This was the biggest business their law firm had encountered since it opened. Coulson glared at Natasha helplessly, turned to a corner and made a phone call. Apparently, he was scolded severely on the phone. After hanging up, Coulson returned to the bar with a dusty face and said embarrassedly, $500,000, no more. I have to go back and write more than 15 reports for this. If you don't agree, we'll see you in court. After that, he picked up the wine glass on the bar and drank the beer in it, looking like a broken jar. Alvin glanced at Matt's gently shaking finger and knew that Coulson was lying. After thinking for a while, he said, "Agent Coulson, this price is far from what I expected." He glanced at Fudge. Fudge jumped up and shouted, "Alvin, leave it to me. This is a lawsuit that we will win. I can negotiate the compensation to more than $3 million US. That's impossible. S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't have that much extra funding. You're just going to drag the lawsuit on indefinitely." Coulson shouted in panic. "Mr. Yeah, I apologize again. Please forgive me. The lawsuit dragging on won't affect me, Agent Coulson," Alvin said noncommittally, "but it's not impossible to negotiate. I can agree to $500,000 in compensation, but S.H.I.E.L.D. has to agree to a few conditions." When Coulson heard the word conditions, he felt bad, as if he was getting on a pirate ship. But now he could only bite the bullet and say, "Please tell me, I may not agree." Yi Qin counted on his fingers and said, "First, the police station here is outdated and needs to be replaced with a new batch of equipment. Look, Michael is even using an old gun from 10 years ago. Their requirements are not high. As long as it is your discarded vehicles, weapons, and equipment, can you sponsor them for free? Don't worry, they will write a letter to the mayor to praise you." Michael and Scott didn't expect that the first request Alvin made was for them. This made the two policemen happy and moved. The city government almost forgot about their police station. Apart from the annual funding and salaries for the police, there was no change of equipment, promotion or salary increase for them. The dilapidated police station didn't even have a decent door. Alvin's first condition was for them. How could they not be moved? Coulson looked at Alvin in confusion. He thought he would face some extreme conditions, but the result was beyond his expectation. Coulson nodded and agreed readily. S.H.I.E.L.D. would eliminate a large number of equipment every year. Agreeing to this condition, as a level 3 agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., he still had this right. Seeing that he agreed readily, Alvin smiled and said, "It seems that we can easily reach an agreement. Second, the new kindergarten that is being built on the corner of our street needs a batch of security monitoring equipment. I believe this is not a problem for SHIELD." Coulson let out a long sigh and looked around. Everyone in the restaurant looked at Alvin with admiration. Coulson straightened his collar and said seriously, "You are a true gentleman. Let me introduce myself to you, Phil Coulson, Level C agent of SHIELD. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Alvin Yee." After saying that, he stretched out his hand and shook Alvin's hand tightly. The feeling of being blackmailed was relieved a lot. Alvin smiled and said, "It seems that you agree?" "Yes, compared with the other conditions, this is hardly a condition," Coulson said seriously. "The third and most important one." Alvin looked at Coulson seriously. "Please go ahead." Coulson looked like he was listening attentively. Alvin looked at Coulson, pointed at Natasha with his hand, and said, "I hope you can stay away from me and my restaurant in the future, okay?" Coulson was stunned for a moment, not knowing what expression to make. He had just developed a good impression of him, but he was dealt a heavy blow. He thought the two sides could have a peaceful ending, but it turned out to be the opposite. Sighing, Coulson said helplessly, "I can't promise anything. I can only promise that we won't cause trouble for you without reason." Alvin nodded and said, "That's enough. Foch and Agent Coulson, please take over the issue of receiving the $500,000. Alvin said and called Foch. "I hope to see you again, Agent Coulson, Agent Natasha." Alvin nodded to the two agents, and finally said hello and signaled to see them off. Foch and Coulson exchanged phone numbers and discussed the issue of compensation. Jessica happily escorted the two agents out the door. When she left, she imitated Alvin's tone and said, "I hope we'll meet again." Seeing the two SHIELD agents leave the restaurant in embarrassment, the diners in the restaurant happily high-fived each other and cheered. They were all residents of Hell's Kitchen and had never received respect from government officials. However, Alvin won over them, which made them very excited, as if they were the winners. Alvin smiled and told Jessica, "1 beer each, I'll buy." As soon as he finished speaking, the cheers got louder. Alvin held a glass of beer in front of Matt, flicked the glass with his index finger, and it made a ding sound. "Thank you, Matt, you helped a lot today." Matt looked up, smiled, and raised his glass. "You deserve it. Alvin, you've made the two nearby blocks better. As a resident of Hell's Kitchen, I should support you. For victory." Alvin clinked glasses with him and said, "For victory." After finishing a large glass of beer in one gulp, Alvin looked at Matt with some concern. After hesitating for a moment, he said, "Maybe you should take a break, Matt. You are not an Iron Man. Jumping around in Hell's Kitchen every night is not something a normal person should do." Matt put down his empty glass, a not-so-healthy blush on his fair face, and said with a smile, "Then you should expand the range of your pet's activities, so that I can reduce some of my workload." Alvin knew who Matt was, the famous daredevil in Marvel. Every night, he wore a red and black battle suit and shuttled through the streets and alleys of Hell's Kitchen, fighting crime and protecting the safety of ordinary people. In the comics, this is a strong, smart, and almost omnipotent superhero. But Alvin knows that in reality, this is a paranoid man covered in scars. As a native of Hell's Kitchen, Matt is obsessed with changing the status quo of Hell's Kitchen. He believes that it is the numerous gangs and endless crimes that have turned Hell's Kitchen into the desperate place it is today. He wants to change the environment of Hell's Kitchen by fighting crime and gangster deals, but he doesn't know that everything he does is in vain, and gangs and crime will never disappear. He is just an ordinary man, who is quite skilled in Alvin's opinion. Maybe he also has a special ability called super hearing. But facing the desperate gangsters, he often cannot completely gain the upper hand, and injuries are inevitable. However, Alvin admires Matt's personality and spirit. A guy who only cares about the safety of others is worthy of admiration. Alvin was a little ashamed and apologized to Matt. "I'm sorry, Matt. You know I have reached an agreement with Kingpin and I can't interfere in the affairs of other blocks." Matt listened, smiled helplessly, looked particularly helpless, and said a little dazedly, "Alvin, we all want Hell's Kitchen to be better. Why have you changed 3 blocks, but I haven't changed anything? People in other blocks are still being robbed and killed. But I can't do anything. Sometimes I hate my ability that allows me to hear strangers' cries for help every night. I tried, but I can't help everyone. I don't know what to do." Alvin poured him another beer, added 2 small glasses of whiskey, and placed it in front of him. He tapped the glass to signal him to drink. Then he said, "Matt, changing the environment of a place is never a one-person job. Do you know why the first condition I put forward to S.H.I.E.L.D. is to improve the equipment of the police station?" Without Matt's answer, Alvin continued, "In this way, people like Michael and Scott will dare to patrol the streets at night. Not all criminals are so crazy as to dare to attack the police. As long as there are police patrolling the streets, the security of Hell's Kitchen will improve." Matt raised his glass silently, took a big sip of wine, and said, "But there are always people getting hurt, and I can't do anything about it." Matt took off his sunglasses, and his gray eyes seemed to have no pupils. Matt rubbed his cheeks hard, looking extremely helpless. After listening to Matt's words, Alvin was a little angry and said helplessly, "You are not God, and God can't save everyone. Matt, you have to relax. We all want to make this place better, and we need to work together. Man, instead of going out to be a volunteer policeman every day, it is better to help the real police so that they can return to their posts. Man, I will talk to Kingpin and ask him to restrain his men and stop causing trouble for ordinary people. You should not go to cause trouble for him, because it will only hurt yourself, and having a guy who can restrain the gangsters is much better than the chaotic Hell's Kitchen anyway." Matt drank the rest of the beer in one gulp and said angrily, "Then let Kingpin go unpunished." Alvin explained helplessly, "Kingpin is not scary, and the current situation of Hell's Kitchen is not caused by Kingpin. It is very easy to kill him, but what happens after we kill him? Hundreds of gangs, big and small, are out of control. What will become of Hell's Kitchen? As long as Kingpin is still here, there will at least be a little order here, even if it is an underground order." Matt lay on the bar, helpless and confused. He seemed to be crushed. He said softly, "Alvin, I don't know if what you said is right or not, but at least the effect you achieved is much better than mine. But this doesn't mean I will give up my approach. I will continue until I can't do anything more." Alvin knew that when he said he was powerless, he meant until he died. Alvin respected him, so he would not stop him from practicing his ideal of making the community better. He patted his shoulder and said, "I support you, but you should at least give yourself a break once in a while." After saying that, he motioned for Matt to have another drink, and this time Alvin switched to whiskey. Soon Matt was completely drunk. While Fudge was bragging and chatting with others, a thin red vine pierced Matt's calf. A stream of red energy flowed into Matt's body along the vine. That was the ability of the corpse-eating vine, which devoured corpses and transformed them into vitality. Alvin calculated the time. When the input energy was enough to completely restore Matt's injured body, Alvin recalled the corpse-eating vine. He poured himself a glass of wine as if nothing had happened, drank it in one gulp, looked at Matt who was sleeping with a ruddy face, and muttered to himself, "For a noble character. For persistent efforts. Cheers." The joyful atmosphere lasted until 12 o'clock in the night, and ended with the closing of the restaurant. After Alvin arranged for JJ to send Matt and Fudge home, he returned to the bedroom on the second floor and went to see little Nick first. He found that he had already fallen asleep. Alvin tucked him in with a smile, turned off the light for him, and walked out. He turned around and found Jessica leaning against the wall in the corridor, looking at him. Alvin touched his cheek and asked, "What's wrong? Is there something dirty?" Jessica stared at Alvin's face. Her shy but admiring eyes made Alvin a little uncomfortable. In his previous life, a 35-year-old man was a little overwhelmed by being stared at by a 19-year-old girl in this life. This was not right. So he joked, "Jessie, did you leave anything here?" Jessica shook her head in confusion. Alvin pretended to be disappointed and sighed, "Oh, I thought our Jessie had left her heart with me and was waiting to go back here." Jessica's face began to turn red at a visible speed, so red that Alvin began to worry that she would burn. Jessica, who was embarrassed and angry, stomped her feet heavily, and the hole was stomped on the floor of the wooden corridor on the second floor with a crack. Her entire right leg sank into the hole. Because she lost her balance, her upper body naturally leaned back, making her originally not very upright breasts look a little bigger. Both of them were stunned. Alvin swore that he was shocked that his house was so weak, and he definitely didn't mean to laugh at Jessica's embarrassment. Jessica's face turned from red to white, and the blood on her face almost instantly faded. Thinking of her current state, one leg stuck under the floor and the other leg on the floor, Jessica could imagine how embarrassing she was. She didn't dare to look at Alvin's expression. She supported herself with both hands and pulled her leg out of the floor. Because she was too strong, one of her trouser legs was completely torn, revealing her long white legs, and at the same time, a piece of the floor flew away. Jessica covered her face and screamed in despair, then rushed into her room and slammed the door shut. Because she used too much force, the entire door and the door frame flew out and hit the opposite wall. Alvin looked at the house that needed major repairs and complained to himself that he was just a bad mouth and had nothing to do but tease Jessica, especially since he was a girl with great strength and easily shy. "Look, tomorrow will be another busy day." Alvin walked to the door and took a look. Jessica was lying on the bed, her head buried under the pillow, screaming in frustration. As a married man, he knew not to mess with a woman at this time. He lifted the door and stuffed the door frame back. He then sent Nick, who had heard the noise and got up to eavesdrop, back to bed. He also returned to his room, ready to have a good sleep and end this busy day. Alvin simply took a shower and lay down on the bed. Today's conversation with Daredevil Matt touched him a little. In his previous life, Alvin grew up, got married, and had children in China. He is an orderist. Whether it is white order or black order, it always beats disorderly chaos. Alvin protected the free communities of Hell's Kitchen with his own strength, which is the limit that other gangs can tolerate. There is a set of mature underground rules here, and Alvin cannot break this set of rules at will, otherwise it will be a war. And the victims of the war are ordinary poor people. When a person is used to holding a gun, he will always think about how to use the gun to solve problems when he encounters problems. Fortunately, Alvin was an ordinary person with his own outlook on life and values in his previous life. Although he has gained great power in this life, when he encounters problems, the role of power always comes behind the rules. This is why he is more willing to help the police in Hell's Kitchen. He can't put shackles on himself like Matt, always wanting to carry the safety of the entire community on his shoulders. Of course, when encountering people or things that go beyond the rules, Alvin is not pedantic. He will fight those who should be beaten and kill those who should be killed. For example, the purple man that Shield is looking for today was fed by him to his pet, the corpse-eating vine. By the way, he saved the current restaurant waitress, Jessica Jones. Alvin didn't read American comics much in his previous life, so he was more familiar with the Avengers in Marvel. He knew Matt because Daredevil was made into a movie, and his characteristics were so memorable, a blind man who was particularly good at fighting. He had never heard of Jessica, the civilian superhero of the Defenders. In this way, he could hire her as his waitress with peace of mind. In fact, given Alvin's character, if he knew Jessica's future trajectory, he might not have hired her. This mature man has a simple idea that superheroes will bring super troubles. But now he knows nothing, and is just a little surprised by Jessica's strange strength. But he himself is a time traveler, and it's no big deal if a little girl is a little stronger. Alvin thought for a while and stopped worrying about things he couldn't control. He communicated with his pets. 3 ghost wolves were responsible for 3 streets, and Thor and Dawn were left to look after his store. The crows were scattered in various corners of Hell's Kitchen. Today they have to share Matt's work. Although there is an agreement with Kingpin that his territory is limited to the 3 nearby blocks, I don't want to fight for territory. I believe Kingpin will understand if I maintain law and order. Besides, he doesn't know that the crows are Alvin's summons. The ghost wolves cannot be sent out. The entire Hell's Kitchen gang knows that the giant wolves are Alvin's pets. Everything was ready. Alvin hugged his pillow and recalled what his wife looked like in his previous life. It was very good and clear. He fell asleep in a few minutes. In his dream, he could see his wife and children. His wife's nagging became kind, and his son's mischief became cute. After a good night's sleep, Alvin woke up at 5 o'clock, got up, washed, put on a set of sports clothes, and went out for a run. A Chinese couple was pushing a breakfast cart at the door. Alvin waved and said hello. Hi, good morning, Uncle Chong, Aunt Chong. Seeing the short boy huddled behind the breakfast cart, wishing he could bury himself in the ground, he smiled and said, Jion, I heard that you got a D in history in your last exam. You're done, kid. Teacher Wilson will teach you a lesson, I'm sure. Aunt Chen's face darkened when she heard this, and she slapped Jarvan's shoulder hard and dragged him out. Jarvan lowered his head, quickly looked up at Alvin, and greeted him softly, Hello, Principal. Alvin glanced at him with a smile, patted his shoulder when he passed by, and said to Uncle Chong, Leave me 10 buns and 3 cups of soy milk, and come back to pay. After that, he pointed at Jarvan with his finger, sneered and said, Boy, you're done. Then he went out for a run. Early in the morning, after running around his own territory, Alvin was harassed by the young woman Dahlia, who was waiting on the road. His charm was affirmed, and he returned to the restaurant refreshed. Uncle Chong and his wife at the door were already busy, steaming and bagging steamed buns one by one, and handed them to the people who got up early in the morning to go to work. Jiawen was responsible for packing the soy milk and collecting money. Seeing Alvin coming back, he was startled and almost spilled the soy milk in his hand on Old Kent, who came to buy breakfast. Old Kent was not angry. Instead, he looked at Jarvan with a sly smile and said, Boy, judging from your appearance, you will not have an easy time in school today. Ha ha, I knew that with Alvin as the principal, you guys will have a hard time, ha ha. Alvin greeted Old Kent and said, Find 2 workers from the kindergarten, 500 yuan, to fix the floor and door upstairs for me. I'm urging them to make progress. Recently, Wu Shuan was received. Discuss with the teacher what equipment is needed and buy toys quickly. I don't want to see 2 or 3-year-old children running on the road anymore. Uncle Chong, who was busy at work, said to Alvin, Is it just some carpentry work? I'll do it for you. It's very simple and free. Alvin thought for a moment and said, Then it's 200 yuan. Ask Old Kent to send over any materials you need. He waved his hand to stop Uncle Chong from talking. He took the packed breakfast and returned to the restaurant. Jessica had already gotten up in the restaurant. I don't know what she was doing. When she saw Alvin come in, her face flushed. She took a rag and wiped the table desperately. Alvin laughed and teased, "If you keep wiping, the paint will fall off." Jessica ignored Alvin, threw down the rag, picked up a small comb, hugged Saul's neck and combed his hair vigorously. The tall Saul was strangled so much that his tongue stuck out, and he looked like he had lost all hope in life. Alvin shuddered and decided not to flirt with this girl. The things in the house were worth a lot of money. After putting down the breakfast, Alvin went upstairs to wake up Nick. But just as he walked to the bar, he saw Nick hopping down from the second floor through the small door. When he saw Alvin, Nick winked and made eyes, and it was unknown what he wanted to express. Sitting in his wheelchair, Nick smiled slyly and said to Jessica loudly, "Jess, I think I need a cup of coffee. There was an earthquake at home yesterday, and I was so scared that I didn't sleep well." Alvin smiled and watched Nick commit suicide, but he didn't say anything. For breakfast, Nick drank a glass of milk with salt. When he was about to eat the meatball in the middle of his bun, it was knocked off. The wheelchair was accidentally knocked over twice. Nick desperately turned to Alvin for help, but Alvin ignored the naughty kid and watched him being bullied. A fierce breakfast ended with Nick bowing his head and admitting defeat. At 7 o'clock, a big-nosed school bus stopped at the entrance of the restaurant and honked its horn. Nick ran out in his wheelchair as if he was running for his life, forgetting to take his school bag. Alvin shook his head, picked up Nick's school bag, and walked out. He also wanted to go to the school. When he went out, he saw that Jarvan was helping Nick move his wheelchair to the school bus. Nick grabbed the door handle and jumped on the school bus on one leg. Alvin said hello to JJ, who put the shotgun under the windshield, and threw the school bag to Nick. He drove a pickup truck, called Don, and asked him to get on the passenger seat. Saul stayed at home to look after the house. The community school in Hell's Kitchen has 36 classes from grade 1 to 12 and more than 1,000 students. Alvin is now the principal of this school. For this purpose, Alvin convened a meeting of the gangs in Hell's Kitchen. After friendly consultations and fair elections, Alvin was elected as the principal of this community school. As for the principal appointed by the Ministry of Education, who cares? The first thing Alvin did when he took office was to negotiate with Kingpin. "You are a gangster boss, the underground godfather of Hell's Kitchen. You should make some contribution to the education of your hometown. This kind of contribution cannot be a one-time thing. It must be a long-term cause." So Kingpin gloriously became a school director with a huge contribution of $5 million a year. It's not difficult to recruit teachers if you have money. Even if this is Hell's Kitchen, it's still working in a school, right? Find a headhunting company and check which excellent teachers are unemployed at home. If you find any, send them a sincere invitation with good treatment, free food and accommodation, and insurance. You have to give me this face. You don't know Alvin, but you have to give Kingpin face. As for the students, as a man who accompanied his son to the 4th grade in his previous life, I know the schedule of a good school. Take a look at the schedule of Mae Tenchan Middle School. They arrive at school at 7:30 in the morning for morning reading, go to class at 8, take a break from 12 to 1:30 in the afternoon, finish school at 5 in the afternoon, and start voluntary evening self-study at 7. Those who don't want to participate need to ask for leave from the principal, Mr. Alvin. Generally, Mr. Alvin will not agree unless there is a death in the family or a fire in the house. Moreover, Mr. Alvin is very busy and is not often in school. Alvin stood at the school gate, watching the students walking into the school on tiptoe like mice seeing a cat. Hearing the current vice principal of the school, the former principal, Nelson Norris, praising his approach, he was very happy. Why should my son study from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day, while your naughty kids can play happily every day? Come to my class, and this will be the main attention branch of Hell's Kitchen in the future. JJ, holding a shotgun and acting as a bodyguard, shed a handful of sympathetic tears for the children in this school. How can this be a school? This is the children's concentration camp in Hell's Kitchen. Don likes to follow Alvin to school. He thinks the work here is very interesting. It is very interesting to knock a student down, listen to his scream of fear, and search for interesting bits and pieces on him. In just a short while, Dom already has a pile of spoils behind him. There are snacks, toys, etc. Several children of different sizes, holding the dangerous items that were searched out, lined up in front of Alvin, waiting to be processed. Alvin was holding a uniquely shaped butterfly knife in his hand, playing with it, and asked the 1,314-year-old white boy in front of him, "Which class are you from? What's your name? Why do you bring a knife to school?" The white boy stiffened his neck and said, "My name is Philip, grade 9, class 1, and the knife is used to cut nails." JJ, who was watching the fun, burst out laughing. "Do you need a half-foot-long knife to cut nails at home?" Alvin couldn't stand others talking with their necks stiff, so he slapped Philip on the neck, making him scream "oh" and squat on the ground with his head in his hands. The boy was still a little unconvinced after being beaten. Although he didn't dare to fight back, he stared at Alvin with his eyes wide and blank. How dare he stare at the principal? Put him in solitary confinement for 2 days. Nelson, give him a copy of the school motto and let him copy it 100 times. Alvin said angrily, "I still don't believe that I can teach you a lesson. If the school method doesn't work, I'll use the prison method." Seeing the tough Philip being dragged into the school screaming by the strong JJ, the other guys behind him were so scared that they didn't dare to breathe. They honestly admitted their mistakes and accepted the punishment, copying the school motto 10 to 50 times. The last fat black guy made Alvin feel troubled. He gritted his teeth and asked coldly, "What's your name? Which class are you from? Who the hell told you to bring marijuana to school?" The fat black boy lowered his head and said, "My name is Levin, and I'm from class 2, grade 6. My dad asked me to bring the marijuana." Alvin yelled angrily, "Who the hell is your dad?" Levin was even more scared and lowered his head and said, "My teacher, Mr. Nathan, always has headaches. He is very good to me. When my dad found out, he asked me to bring him a bag of marijuana to help him get better from his headache." Alvin was holding back his anger and kicked an iron trash can at the door. He didn't know what he felt. The kid's father was probably a drug dealer. In order to thank the teacher, he asked the kid to bring a pack of marijuana to the teacher to cure his headache. What the hell is this? I couldn't bear to blame Levin, so I patted his head and said, "The teacher will go to the doctor for a headache. Don't bring marijuana to school in the future, otherwise you will be put in detention like Philip. This pack of marijuana is confiscated. Go to class." Levin rushed into the school with his head down, as if he had been pardoned. Seeing that Alvin was in a bad mood, Nelson laughed softly. "It's already pretty good. A few years ago, this place was simply a reserve talent base for gangs. Can you believe that there were kids openly selling drugs in the school at that time? Now it's better than I thought." Alvin was stunned for a moment, then said coldly, "How is the land applied to the city government? I have to build the student dormitory quickly and keep these kids in the school. I can't let them continue to hang out on the streets. I want them all to go to college." Nelson smiled and said, "Almost. There is enough open space in Hell's Kitchen. The open space behind the school is enough to build 2 teaching buildings, 2 student dormitories and 1 teacher dormitory." After hesitating for a moment, he continued, "The design of the student dormitory is too compact. Is a 30 square meter dormitory for 6 people too crowded? Alvin glanced at Nelson and thought, "You have never seen the student dormitories in remote areas of China. I didn't ask you to build a dormitory with big bunk beds. These kids should burn incense and pray to Buddha. 6 people are too crowded. Many universities in China can't meet this standard. 95% of the families in Hell's Kitchen are in the poverty class. I don't charge tuition. What else do you want?" Perhaps noticing Alvin's unfriendly look, Nelson quickly changed the subject, "But it's okay this way. At least we have provided the children with a safe learning environment so that they can study with peace of mind. Your contribution to this school will be remembered by history," said the wily old gentleman with gray hair. Alvin was in a good mood after hearing this, and he patted Nelson's shoulder happy. This old guy had been the principal of Hell's Kitchen for 15 years, and he was quite capable. Although his character was average, at least he was likable, and he was also good at dealing with the Ministry of Education. The operation of this school still relied on the power of the Ministry of Education, and he had to run around for equipment and funding. "Alvin, you bastard, look at what you have done." An old voice came from behind and cursed. Alvin rubbed his nose. The owner of this voice was not so likable.